Some insects have a system that's called cyclic respiration. I'll just do a single spiracle with no connections. This is not accurate biologically, but it'll work for the sketch. Cyclic respiration, the intent is to reduce water loss. Selection favors this in insects living in dry environments where they need to minimize the amount of water they lose to the environment. Spiracles can be open or closed. In cyclic respiration, the cyclic refers to the fact that the spiracles are sometimes open and sometimes closed. The pattern of spiracle opening and closing in cyclic respiration is what reduces water loss. Let's start with the case where the spiracle has been wide open. There's a buildup of carbon dioxide. Oxygen is low. Of course, 100% saturated with H2O, so water is high. Water vapor is high. The high concentration of carbon dioxide means that the partial pressure gradient favors carbon dioxide moving out. Oxygen is low, and so the low partial pressure of oxygen favors oxygen moving in. Water is high, so water is leaving. The excretion of carbon dioxide is important. Picking up new oxygen is important. At the end of this period, oxygen is back to atmospheric, carbon dioxide back to atmospheric, and water vapor is still about 100% saturated. At that point, the spiracle closes. Oxygen moves out because oxygen is being picked up by cells that are converting it to carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide moves back into the trachea. Oxygen follows its partial pressure gradient down into the extracellular fluid and then into the cells. Oxygen levels are going down. Carbon dioxide levels are starting to go up. Water spiracle opens very briefly. Saturated. And at this point, there's a net decrease in oxygen. This is sometimes called a flutter. The carbon dioxide has partly gone as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in the spiracles, but part of it has combined with water in a reaction catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase to form H2CO3, which then can dissociate into a proton and bicarbonate. The carbon dioxide is partially as a gas and partially weak acid and buffer in fluid. The oxygen, however, that's been removed was all removed as a gas. The total pressure has actually decreased. When the spiracle opens briefly, there's actually air pressure that pulls in a burst of new air. You can think of it as a very small puff of air because of the negative pressure. That brings in oxygen, which is at 21% of the atmosphere, nitrogen, which is at 79%, and of course carbon dioxide is only 0.03%. So that puff of air brings in a significant amount of new oxygen, but no new carbon dioxide, and it replenishes some of the oxygen in there. That allows this process to continue. The new oxygen, again, is being brought into cells which are producing more carbon dioxide, some of which again becomes a gas, and some of which is converted into carbonic acid, bicarbonate ion, and a proton. After a while, the oxygen content again goes down. The carbon dioxide content is at this point a little bit higher, but a lot of it is still in this other form. So again, a second brief opening, and a second puff of air enters, which again brings in more oxygen, a tiny amount, a trivial amount of carbon dioxide. Notice that during this process, no water is escaping. Only new air is coming in. The valuable water molecules that the insect wants to conserve are retained inside the spiracle system and the trachea. So that new oxygen allows more carbon dioxide to be produced. At some point after multiple rounds, the carbon dioxide level gets quite high. At that point, the acidity is no longer being buffered effectively enough by the insect. Now we have a new situation. Carbon dioxide levels are high, oxygen levels are low, acid and bicarbonate are high. We still have 100% water inside the tracheal system. As the acidity gets too high for the insect to manage effectively, it opens wide. It's gone through a series of many small flutter openings that allowed new oxygen in, but carbon dioxide kept building up. It did retain water inside the tracheal system. Now we open wide, and there's a very high partial pressure gradient of carbon dioxide, so carbon dioxide leaves quickly down that very high partial pressure gradient. It's only 0.03% here. It might be 20% here. And as that carbon dioxide leaves, that means that carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the tissue fluids can enter the tracheal system and leave. Again, it's moving down its partial pressure gradient, which reduced inside the tracheal system because of the loss to the atmosphere. So now we have carbon dioxide leaving, which brings carbon dioxide from extracellular fluids out into the tracheal system, which now reverses the direction of this reaction. Carbonic anhydrase can catalyze the reaction in either direction, which then causes protons and bicarbonate to convert back into carbonic acid. Now this whole reaction is reversing direction and taking the carbon dioxide out. In the meantime, new oxygen has been coming in. Only in this part of the cycle is there water loss. So imagine that an insect, instead of having its tracheal system open all the time, may have its tracheal system open only 10%, 5%, even less than that. It cuts its water loss down to 10% or 5% or even less than that. Cyclic respiration uses fluttering and the fact that carbon dioxide dissolves well in water and can be converted to carbonic acid, bicarbonate, and a proton to allow carbon dioxide to accumulate. The negative pressures brings in little puffs of new oxygen, prevents water from leaving. And only during the period when the spiracles are open wide, when all of this carbon dioxide in various forms is excreted, does water loss occur.